That's it for international football in 2024 now. We've now got 8 game weeks to plan in Draft FPL in just 5 weeks, so let's get stuck in. Welcome back to the Draft FC podcast, the podcast website and YouTube channel dedicated to all things official Draft FPL. My name is Mitch and I'm your host for another GameWeek preview going over waiver options, hidden gems and general Premier League chat ahead of Game Week 12. So as I just mentioned, that was the final international break of 2024, so there won't be any breaks like that until the spring. We will still have 1 or 2 breaks before then though for FA Cup fixtures and the like. But otherwise, the real slog starts now over the winter period. As I said, 8 game weeks now until New Year. New Year obviously just 5 weeks away, which means there's going to be plenty of weeks with double deadlines, which means double podcasts for me to plan and record too. In terms of what's coming up in this episode, I'm obviously recording this one quite late because it's been a very busy week for me. So it's 21st of November. The deadline is now less than 24 hours away. So hopefully you'll find time to listen to this before then. Draft Duel is going to be slightly different this week. Still playing around with that format, and hopefully you like what I do with it today. Otherwise, will be business as usual. Now, as I am recording this on the 21st, there are lots of press conferences going on as I speak. Some very fresh injury developments have come off this morning, which I've just last minute added into the slides. So, of course, as usual, everything is subject to change. Some of the players I'll be discussing in this episode include Ben White, and in particularly Ben White's injury, the Everton defence, Bailey, plus many more. So let's get straight into it. So a quick reminder, the Game Week 12 waiver deadline will be tomorrow, which is 11 a.m. UK time on Friday, the 22nd of November, which is the standard familiar draft waiver deadline we are used to with a lunchtime kickoff on Saturday, which means the main Game Week deadline is at the more usual time of 11 a.m. UK time on Saturday, the 23rd. I will remind again that our 1-month free trial code is still very much active. If you haven't taken advantage of it already, given the fact that we've got quite a few game weeks squeezed into the next month, you'll be able to get as much bang for your buck as you could possibly hope for by taking advantage of that now. One of the big draws that I know has pulled a few of you in is the fact that signed up members will have access to our private Discord community, which has now got well over 100 members in now and is thriving and working nicely as I intend it to. So if you want to be part of that group, you have to be a signed up member. And if you say want to try before you buy, then use that code DFC324 to get a 1-month free trial. Draft FC Taz is doing loads of work on the site over the next month because he'll have a little bit of time away later on in the year. So pulling out all the stops to get some things sorted out now. We're having a complete overhaul of our expected points algorithm, which feeds into a lot of other features in the site. And if you are a member and you're in the Discord channel, he's keeping everyone, including myself, nicely updated in there of what he's up to. So yeah, DFC Free 24, a really good time to take advantage of that if you haven't. So let's kick things off with Waiver Watch. This data coming at you courtesy of Draft FC, and all of this data available to fully signed up members. So let's take a look at some of the players that you were bringing in. It seems like a long time ago now, a couple of weeks ago, the players you were bringing in ahead of Game Week 11. Now, I've tweaked my the tables and the stats now. I was saying to you before that I was probably going to pivot away from 8-team leagues because there's a lot of skewed numbers for leagues that become inactive. So these are now going to be for 10-team leagues until we potentially add some filters to get rid of the dead leagues. So for now, I'm going to stick to 10-team leagues, which means some of the numbers might seem slightly off compared to what we were looking at before, but on the whole should give us a bit more of an accurate trend of what's happening. So Kirkes, Hall, Hudson-Odoi, Kadioglu and Livramento were the top players coming in. We also had quite a lot of moves for Caicedo, Dragozin, Tavernier, Alex Moreno and Janel. So not many glamorous picks in there, but on the whole I can understand why those players were on that list. The players making way were Justin, Stones, Buonanotte, Mavididi, Matheus Nunes. That's a bit of a surprising one. Tarkowski, Ruben Diaz, Matty Cash, Ashley Young and Michael Keane. So I expect some of those players might actually be bouncing back onto the most wavered in lists within the next week or two, but we shall see. Let's have a chat about some key injuries and suspensions. Now, coming out of the international break means there is a lot of less than accurate injury news in terms of how long, what's going on. Obviously, lots of players drop out of their international teams. It does not mean we will not see them in Game Week 12. So if there's someone you got your eye on who didn't join up their squad or who had some sort of knock or vague injury before the break, keep an ear out for their press conference in the next 24 hours or so. I would imagine a lot of them end up being absolutely fine. One player that is definitely not going to be fine, though, and one that I want to highlight in particular, is Ben White, who has had some sort of knee arthroscopy procedure. Obviously, decided for him it's worth the slight layoff now in order to get the issue right. His average draft position pre-season was 25th overall. Obviously, coming off the back of his big season last year, means that those of you that do own him or have traded for him probably do have quite a lot, tied up value invested in him. There isn't really a definitive report about the exact nature of the injury that led to him having the arthroscopy in the first place. My best guess is it's going to be some sort of slight meniscal tear that hasn't been severe enough to keep him fully out, but has probably been causing some ongoing aggro, and they just decided to pull the trigger and get the procedure done. Based on that, I expect it to be probably the shorter end of the likely recovery span, and even a sort of 10-week return to play time, which would still be on the conservative side, meaning we could see him, even a little quicker than that potentially, but it's all guesswork at this stage. Either way, it obviously coincides with the busiest spell in the calendar, and so owners need to really plan their move on the assumption he's going to be out until around Game Week 20. I think it's probably not an unfair number to plan around. Could be slightly longer, could be slightly quicker. That would then leave less than half the season upon his return. The issue is, though, he'll be rusty. It's a long period of time to be off. It's also a bit of a chance for an alternative first choice back four to emerge there, which may then mean he's not an automatic return to the starting 11. There's a little bit of a wider point here about the Arsenal defence in general without him. They haven't been as forthcoming with clean sheets so far this season, and they haven't kept a clean sheet when White has been missing. So we've of course seen a lack of consistent health with Timber and Calafiore, which means there will naturally need to be a bit of reliance on some of the other players, the likes of Tomiyasu, Kirill, Zinchenko, Partey we've seen filling in at right back a little bit recently too. The positive flip side, however, is that the fixture run for Arsenal over the next couple of months is very favourable. So, if it were me, certainly not the time to be cashing in on the likes of Saliba, Gabriel or Rayo, looking to offload them. If it were me, though, if I was someone that had Ben White in sort of the majority of standard size leagues, and when I say that, I mean anywhere between 6 and 10, I would be pretty proactive, and he either has to be a drop or a trade out this week. So you can have a look, you can shop him around the fellow managers in your league, see if you can get any value for him. If not, I think you're going to have to bite the bullet and drop him for someone that's going to play. Trading obviously is a better outlet, and the bigger your league size, there's obviously going to be more value in holding on the bench. I think if you're in a league bigger than 10, you could probably do some quick maths on some paper and decide whether that could be worthwhile for you, assuming a fairly average return on his comeback from injury. But for the majority of you listening who've got Ben White, it's going to have to be a hard choice this week, I think. And sure enough, come Christmas time, someone will grab him, or even around New Year, preempting that return. But that's the game we play, and you'll get far more out of that spot, with a streamable defender, particularly with the amount of games. We know that you need your full 15. Players that are nailed on to start will get rested. So your bench is very much going to need to come into play over Christmas and New Year. So carrying the likes of Ben White just completely removes that spot from your team. And as I said, I think if you're in an 8, 9, 10 team league, you'll be far better off in the long run to just drop him now. A couple of other things just to point out that have sort of come out in the last couple of days. Fatawu for Leicester has injured his ACL. He's going to be out for the season. That got announced literally minutes before I jumped on to record. Just to point out as well, Buonanotte is suspended this coming game week for 5 yellows. I know his ownership's gone up a little bit. I've got him in one of my draft teams and we'll be moving him on this week. And Bentancur has been given a 7-match ban, which will put him out until around game week 18 due to racist comments that he made a good few months ago now in pre-season towards teammate Heung-min Son. So not a very good-looking situation there outwardly. But as it stands, 7-match ban. I know in some larger leagues, Bentancur has been getting picked up. So let's talk about some main picks. And I'm not gone too heavy on the number of players to talk about this week for the sake of timing more than anything. The Everton defence I do want to bring up. Interestingly, in 10-team leagues, Michael Keane has become the most owned Everton defender, hitting 59% ownership. I said before the round 11 fixtures that Branthwaite would be back in if he was fit, and he was. His ownership now just 35% in 10-team leagues, which means he's there for about 2/3 of you and well worth a pickup. Not least for even just this weekend with the home game against Brentford, and then Wolves at home the week after next, which is a midweek game week in game week 14. You know, the way they play, the way they set up, they're always fairly decent value for a clean sheet. Our expected points algorithm, as it stands, is predicting a fairly good week for them. And if they're in the waivers and you've got a streaming defender spot, definitely ones that I would consider. There are a couple of other teams who could have good availability too, with some defenders that you might want to look at if you're thinking slightly longer term, but we'll come on to that in just a minute. Bradley is another big one to highlight. Very low ownership, 14% currently, all really dependent on the injury news regarding Alexander-Arnold. But similarly with Tsimikas, if we know he's going to play, well worth having, especially with the trip to Southampton this weekend. I'd have any Liverpool player I could get my hands on, to be honest. Southampton are going to have to set up with a slightly alternative defensive arrangement due to Bednarek's injury, which won't help them at all, obviously. Just while I've mentioned Tsimikas as well, because I know that the kind of Tsimikas-Robbo debate kind of rages on, where I'm at with it at the moment is that I just don't really want to mess around with that. So if you're someone that's eyeing up Tsimikas on the waivers or eyeing up or discussing trading one of them with somebody else, personally, it's just not for me at the moment. If you've got some intel or particular insight that you think one of them is going to play the majority of league games, then crack on. But for me, when it comes down to those kind of 50-50 rotations, particularly for a defender, I'd just rather stay away. The last one to highlight is Munoz for Palace. Ownership is reasonably high at 67%, but really one of the premium attacking players in the game. If we look at the last sort of month or so, in the last 5 game weeks, his non-penalty expected goal involvements per 90 is 0.5, which is the kind of numbers we're looking at for midfielders and strikers. It's equally split between goals and assists. Not the best fixtures coming up, but Munoz could be becoming fixture-proof if he carries on creating like he is now, and if he does continue to get the odd return, then, you know, against some of those bigger teams as well, then all the more value for him. Next, some midfielders. The first one to highlight is Leon Bailey for Aston Villa, who was, his ownership currently stands at 43%. And if I look at the Draft FC squad plan, it shows me that the ownership for Bailey has dropped consistently from a post-draft day roster of 99% down to just the 43% that he's at now. His average draft pick on draft day was 51 overall, but unsurprisingly, managers have been getting turned off and losing faith. Just 2 assists all season from an expected goal involvement of 1.8, so, you know, it's not like he's underperforming particularly, and he's had a decent number of, 500 minutes to get those numbers, so it's not like we haven't seen him. Huge drop-off from last season's 10 goals and 11 assists, which he got from 2,000 minutes, so he's well below that line. Villa have a huge trip to Stamford Bridge in game week 13, but otherwise have some pretty good fixtures on paper in the lead up to Christmas. The injury to Jacob Ramsey means the odds of Bailey starting a few games now are high. Bailey fits the mould of that buy low candidate and could even be sitting in your waiver pile down the bottom somewhere. It is a bit of a leap of faith because he hasn't looked anywhere near as electric as he did last year. Perhaps that's to do with the makeup of the 11 and some of the other players like Morgan Rogers starting to take more of the, more of the strain in terms of their attacking output. But, maybe the final international break before Christmas could have just provided a little bit of a reset time for him. As I said, if that injury to Ramsey does keep him out for a few weeks, then we should see Bailey have a little run in the team again. and with good fixtures, an excellent opportunity for some points. And if he does hit the ground running and gets back in the team, you could have picked up a very holdable asset for a very low price. Next is Damsgaard, who just a few weeks ago was our most hidden gem pick, but since then has gone from strength to strength. He's now up to 30% ownership in 10-team leagues. You'll notice that I've honed in on the last month when I'm quoting some of the numbers and pulling data out for this episode, and just to really pull out some form picks. And if we look at Brentford, Damsgaard has the highest expected goal involvements per 90 at a whopping 0.67, looking over the last 5 appearances, and he's got a goal and 3 assists in that time. Puts him higher than the likes of Visser and Brumo in terms of his underlying stats. So definitely emerging as a very solid draft pick. And then the last one I'm not going to dwell on too much because we covered him in the draft duel last time. But say on a per 90 basis, Neto's underlying numbers equal Cole Palmer's over the last month or so. A player I'm a big fan of and going up in my estimation every single week. So if he's available in the waivers, he's a must pick up for me. Let's move to draft duels. So as I said at the beginning, I'm going to do it slightly differently to the familiar format this week based on a suggestion from somebody in the Discord community, from one of the members. And just another selling point for the Discord, you can really help steer the content to your own needs if you've got some good suggestions. So rather than doing player A versus player B, we're sort of going to do team A versus team B and look at their defenses as a whole. And the teams that were suggested and that have come up were Brighton and Chelsea. And the reason for that will become evident in just a moment when we have a look at their fixture run now. There was another suggestion to maybe do Man United, but again, another member rightly pointed out they're at a bit of a crossroads, Man United, so it's hard to know who the personnel are going to be, where they're going to play exactly in that system. Kind of need to suss them out for 2 or 3 weeks. With some of the injuries, suss them out for a little bit longer, and then we'll probably have more of an idea. Though I've got no doubt there are going to be lots of United fans taking that leap of faith already this week and picking up some of their defenders, and I've got one of them included in the hidden gems today, just as a bit of a nod to that. But anyway, Brighton and Chelsea, let's have a look at why these two teams stand out. So for those watching on screen, I've got their fixtures run until game week 23, which basically takes us until the end of January. So that is 12 game weeks in that time. As you can see, lots of congestion around December. So we've got 6 game weeks in December, and we've still got 2 game weeks to go before the end of November's out. And just looking down at us, I'm not going to, for those listening, I'm not just going to reel off all of the games they're playing, but suffice to say, for Chelsea, if we look at the next 12, they've got a trip to Spurs in game week 15, and they've got a trip to City right at the end of that run in game week 23. So you could even sort of close their line off in game week 22. Other than that, they are playing lots of fairly weak teams in the grand scheme of things. Now, if we look at what they've done up to now, they started with Manchester City in game week 1. They've played Liverpool, Newcastle and Arsenal in that time. So not the easiest, but maybe not quite so difficult as Brighton's, as I'll mention in a second. Chelsea have yet to play any of the newly promoted clubs. Obviously, they will start ticking them off this week with a trip to Leicester, which should be a good game with Maresca returning to the King Power for the first time since leaving. It means that in the next 12 games, the ones highlighted on screen, Chelsea play all of the current 6 teams in the Premier League. So really can't undersell how good that run is. If we look at Brighton and look at some data on different sites, there's quite a good table that Footy Labs run, looking at fixture difficulty rating at different times of the calendar. And they put Brighton's schedule up to now, so game weeks 1 to 11, as the 18th most difficult in the Premier League. They face United, Arsenal, Spurs, Newcastle, Liverpool, City already. A few of those obviously away from home. Then in their next 12 games, they face 7 of the current bottom 8 teams. So a huge swing. And as we'll see in a minute on the overall table, a huge change in their kind of ranking in terms of how hard those fixtures are. So if we move on, obviously a slightly different table for those watching than the usual draft duel where I have some of their attacking stats. These are obviously changed for the team. So if I go through it in turn, we look at clean sheets so far. Neither team very exciting. Brighton have 3, Chelsea just the 2. Goals against, Brighton have conceded 15 to Chelsea's 13. That puts Brighton at around 10th overall and Chelsea at joint 6th overall. So expected underlying stats, very, very similar. So if we look at expected goals against, Brighton rank 11th and Chelsea rank 9th. All very average, very, very average. Just as a point of interest, I've included PPDA there, which is passes per defensive action, which I guess to boil it down into very simple, the way the number is calculated, it's looking at the number of passes completed by an opponent and you divide it by the number of defensive actions taken by the pressing team. So what it really boils down to is how aggressive, how good at pressing the team is. And really all this illustrates is the difference in philosophy between the two teams. So while you might like them both defensively, Brighton are ranked 4th in that metric, which means they're a very front-footed pressing team. Chelsea ranks just 13th, which means they're more likely to sit back in a lower block and let teams come onto them so that they can counter-attack. If we look at those fixtures, as I said, Brighton were 18th in the difficulty from game weeks 1 to 11. If we look at just the next 6, so game weeks 12 to 17, they're ranked 2nd and Chelsea are ranked 4th. So a big swing for both of those. And if we look at then the latter one between 18 and 23, Brighton sink slightly to 10th and Chelsea stay quite well at 4th overall. So both showing very good fixtures and defences that have been by no means bad, but by no means great. But that could just be because they've played a lot of the hardest teams already. So if we look, obviously what that means for us as draft managers, we've got to decide who we might be picking up off the waiver pile. For Brighton, well, let's start with the goalkeepers. For Verbruggen and Sanchez, I think are both fairly nailed number ones at the moment and are very likely to be picked up in pretty much all leagues that are listening. So I'm not going to dwell on those. I'd happily have either one of them. In terms of Brighton, I think the player I like the most is Estupiñán. He's starting to become a mainstay in the team. The minutes seem fairly safe. Starting to get more involved in the attacks, and we know what his potential is at times from previous seasons. Kadioglu, I know there's a bit of a doubt about him currently due to an injury. The reason I'm quite high on him is because we've also seen him playing out of position as more of a right-sided midfield player with in front of a conventional back four as well. So it gives him another outlet in the team. And obviously if he's playing right mid, he's far more likely to get involved in the attacks. Van Hecke, Veltman and Dunk are all fairly nailed on. Igor's on there at the moment because he's been playing because Van Hecke and then Dunk have been injured. So I wouldn't rush to get him because I think if Dunk's fit, he will go back into the 11. For Chelsea, Colwill and Fofana are the most nailed on. Gusto, I think, is reasonably safe to play and is obviously far more attacking, though Colwill's attacking numbers aren't bad either compared to Fofana. So Colwill's my first choice, Gusto number 2, Cucurella I got just behind them, and then James I've got underneath. Now, I know lots of you will be looking at that and going, why is James so high? He's back fit, he's a captain. I've said it before, I'm just done with Reece James. You're more than welcome to take that risk, but even if he does start a few games over the next month or two, he's 100% not going to play them all because he can't play 2 games in a week. So you're going to have that to deal with. But even if he does play, positionally, he is nowhere near the Reece James we were seeing a couple of years ago when he was getting assists and goals left, right and centre. So you're only getting him for a clean sheet potential. We know that overall clean sheets are not something to bet your house on anyway. And plus the fact, if we fast forward to January and you took the risk now between James over the likes of Colwill, and it turns out that James went and pulled his hamstring again next week, would you be surprised? Not at all. And you could have missed out on some very reliable returns for a very prolonged run in the likes of Colwill or Fofana. So obviously, now, preempting where some of the comments are going to go below this afterwards, because I know if I put up a table like that and say what I just said, someone will then come and say Estupiñán or Colwill. So what I've done is I've put the two into one big list, and then this is my list. This is my kind of preference list overall. So for those that are listening, I'll just read them off very quickly. Estupiñán, Colwill, Kadioglu, Fofana, Van Hecke, Gusto, Veltman, Dunk, Cucurella, James, Igor, and Tosin just bringing up the rear. So if any of these are available and you're not sure on the order, this is the order that I would put them in. Let's get to hidden gems, and I'm going to do these quite quickly because, as I said, it's very close to the turnaround before the waivers. The only defender to highlight, because I know it's going to come up, is Yoro for United. Roster just below 5% now, so plenty of him available. I know his ownership's going to go up. I would be very, very surprised if he starts in game week 12, but I would not be surprised if we see him worked in over the next couple of weeks. But obviously with the injury and with the fixture pile up, for him to suddenly just come in and become, a first choice centre back in that system, I think is unlikely. So not one for me. I'm more just highlighting because I know he'll be a name that goes through your mind for a lot of you listening. And then midfielders, as always, there are loads of options in hidden gem territory that I quite like. Merino is just starting to nudge out of hidden gem territory, ownership to 9% now. I'm really not sure what the Arsenal first choice 11 is now. Odegaard is of course back in there, but assuming they've got their standard backline, I'm not sure how they play the likes of Rice, Merino, Partey, because one of them generally has to miss out then. My guess is that if everyone's fit, Merino misses out, but Rice could easily move to number 6. And then Partey could miss out. I think obviously the injury to White means that they could all play in Partey slots in at right back. But I like highlighting Merino particularly because his offensive stats have looked pretty good in recent weeks with nearly 0.5 non-penalty expected goal involvements per 90, which puts him well above Rice. Also putting him above the likes of Hazard and Trossard too. So if you have more confidence than me in his minutes, then he could be a very astute pickup. As I said, my confidence in his minutes is kind of growing by the hour, really, because, if you think about that White injury and the other injuries that they've got, they do seem to trust Partey more to slot in at right back. And if Calafiore is going to be out for a little bit, Timber will have to play at left back. And it sort of means that Merino then has to play because beyond him, Rice and Odegaard, and Partey, there isn't really a fifth player that's going to regularly come into that midfield. Next is Harry Wilson. Ownership going up to the heights of 3%. Didn't get a start following his heroics against Brentford. Still came off the bench and scored. Had another one ruled out for a very, very light brush of the arm, ruled out for handball. So we could have been talking about him with 4 goals in just 16 minutes of football. I guess the issue, though, is when you do this, is the manager knows you can be relied on as a super sub. So mainly he's not going to be due for a start very soon, but we have to highlight him. And I think if you're in a league beyond 12 managers, then even if he doesn't get a start, I think he still has to be someone that you pick up if he can do what he's doing off of the bench. Smodix for Ipswich, again, not a stranger to the podcast. If this bloke was wearing a United shirt, his ownership would be 96% now, not 6%. Aside from Delap up top and probably Leif Davis in defence, he's really the only other Ipswich player that we can consider at the moment. Have a look at Ipswich's fixture run up to Christmas in case you've been just kind of brushing over them. Very good. And even the home game against United this week with a new manager, we don't really know what we're going to get. Doesn't necessarily put me off. Next, we've got O'Reilly for Brighton. Excellent cameo off the bench against Manchester City. And with the sort of constant turnover of injuries at Brighton, may not be long before we see him in the starting 11. Now, last season, he was the quintessential all-rounder for Celtic. 13 goals and 11 assists in 32 appearances. And an overall career expected goal involvements of about 0.5, so 1 in 2. Aside from a bit of hype when he signed, I can honestly say I've only seen really the few minutes live at least that he has in a Brighton shirt. I don't really follow the SPL, so never really saw him for Celtic, don't follow them, but his ownership numbers suggest he's not really on many other people's radars at the moment either, but with their fixture run, as we just highlighted, I suspect that ownership will go far higher than 1%. Before Christmas is over. Their next 7 league fixtures alone provide an excellent opportunity for them to solidify a European spot. And O'Reilly looks like he could be a very exciting part of that. The last one to mention is Sarabia, just 2% owned. In his last 3 appearances, his non-penalty expected goal involvements per 90 is 0.67. Obviously a very small sample size, but as poor as Wolves have been, they are still on their own good fixture run with a trip to Fulham next. He is flagged as a slight injury doubt. That's the only concern. He's not he's not someone I'm massively keen on, but definitely one to eye up. But I prefer a lot of the other names on that list over him if I had the choice. And finally, the most hidden gem pick, the one I've gone for this week, is Jasper Lindstrom for Everton. Just 2% rostered in 16-team leagues. Now, if you look at, aside from Beto, who's only played 75 minutes this season, If you look at Everton as a whole, Lindstrom has the highest non-penalty expected goal involvements per 90. And I didn't actually write down what the number is, but you can look it up. But trust me, apart from Beto, it is the highest. The only downside, though, is that he has actually 0 returns to show for that. He started the last 2 games, and if McNeil isn't fit for this one, I'd expect him to start another one this weekend against Brentford. So this is, I'm not going to... This is really for the big leagues, and it's simply an opportunistic moment to potentially get a very low-value player, possibly due a return, at home against a team that can definitely concede goals in Brentford. So, yeah, just one to look at if you hadn't considered him. In the interest of time, I'm not going to do one of my whistle-stop tours through the predicted lineups. I did update them just half an hour before jumping on. I'm going to then come away and edit, catch up with all the rest of the press conference news that has come out, update them again as I need to, and then I can tweak them again tomorrow morning before the waivers. So yeah, even if you're not a signed up member, you can Google or just go on the Draft FC website. They're very easy to find and should be fairly up to date. So that's it for this episode. A reminder again, the waiver deadline is less than 24 hours away at the time of recording, and probably the time you're listening to this. At 11 a.m. UK time on Friday the 22nd, with the main game week deadline just 24 hours after that. As I said earlier, if you haven't signed up and want to have a look at what we offer and get into that exclusive Discord community, then you can with the code DFCFree24. For those listening, I'll put that down in the description below as well to use. And why the hell not? Also, for those watching, make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss out on any of these as they drop. Because of the number of fixtures and number of game weeks coming up, there's going to be a lot of pods dropping, probably quite last minute and at different times to what you're used to looking out for. So make sure you are subscribed and give us a thumbs up so you like these. Helps spread it out to more people and just stops you from missing them as they appear. Likewise, for those listening on the audio, make sure you're following on whichever podcast platform you listen to as well for the same reasons. Give us a follow on X if you're still on there at draft_FC. That's probably the social media we're the most active. I post a little bit on Reddit. I've closed the Instagram channel because it was just another place I had to look out for messages and DMs, and I wasn't keeping up with it enough. Plus, I don't really think it's the best social media to be posting draft and FPL content, so we've closed that for now, so you don't need to worry about keeping up to that. I know there's been a bit of a mass exodus to Blue Sky. To be honest, I've got a little bit of social media fatigue as it is, so we certainly will not be jumping over there in a hurry. I may get a username placeholder there so that if we do need to move, we can do. But yeah, don't go trying to find us on Blue Sky anytime soon. But yes, other than that, I will leave you be. Make sure you go away and get some waivers penciled in now because it's not going to be long before they get processed. Best of luck for the return of the Premier League, and until next time, stay sure.